Okay, so yeah, we will jump into the next topic today. It's the last agenda point, as we had Marko Stefancic from Ericsson Nikola Tesla in the topic of ESEF, and we had Christoph Kocher in the topic of ESG. We also have a guest for the topic of SRD II, which is basically standing for Shareholder Identification and Information. And yeah, I'm very, very glad we brought Rainer Hecker. He's Investor Relations Manager from ThyssenKrupp. I'm pretty sure everybody knows ThyssenKrupp. It's a very, very big German company producing steel, mainly. So they also are in conversations about ESG. And yeah, our agenda for today's last topic is, I want to give you a short introduction to SRD II. If you read ARUG II, it's just basically the national translation from SRD II. So it's basically, it's congruent to each other. Then we want to, please go back to the agenda. We want to give you some experience reports on how do we handle SRD II, because our platform, the Deutsche Plattform for Aktionärsidentifikation and Information, which is basically shareholder information identification, we started in Germany. I'm pretty sure you remember everything in the first steps. And then we saw, okay, it's an European regulatory, and we became more and more European with the platform. Basically today, our customers are 50-50 German and not German, European issuers. So we will give you a short experience report and the development of SRD II. Then Rainer Hecker will give you a status quo and shares his thoughts and experience with SRD II. And at the end, the use case for the annual meeting. So how can you use SRD II in regards of the annual meeting, which is like the job maker in terms of SRD II. So let's go ahead. Yep. So, SRD II emerged 1.5 years ago in the late 2020. It was kind of a rough start. Technically, SWIFT is the communication. SWIFT was chosen because it's the communication way of banks, of intermediaries, which are the most important part of the whole story in SRD II. And yeah, the SWIFT implementation was a rough start, but now it's in effect, and it's in a great effect. So it became good. So you can give me that. So, what are the objectives of SRD II? First of all, it's about identifying your shareholders. As an issuer, you have the ability, you always had the ability to work together with NASDAQ, with Bloomberg, Orient Capital. There are many analysis companies who help you get a clearer view over your shareholders, but you never had the possibility to disclose your retail market, your private shareholders, your private entities who invest in your company. And this is what SRD II does basically. Like there's a lot of words, there's a lot of key points, but basically it's about identifying every shareholder who is invested in your company. Also, and there's another one, there's another obligement with SRD II. Issuers in Europe are obliged to communicate their time of general meeting, if they pay a dividend or some else. There's also an obligement, but the most important thing is really identifying your shareholders. So, what is contained in such a response? So if you use the platform, the dpaii, and if you want to get information about your shareholders, what do you get? So you get, in our case, it's an Excel sheet or an XML file, also a PDF output is possible, and you get all the data of your shareholders, like address, name, date of birth, and obviously quantity of shares this single entity holds, and obviously email address. We were talking about ESG just a couple of minutes before. I mean, there's so much paper printed every year, and like be honest with yourself. If you get an information from an issuer you are invested in, do you really read that 30-pager, 20-pager? It's for the trash. Like, let's be honest. You look at it, you see, okay, that's I'm invested in this company, it's fine, but you don't actually read it, and it's a lot of printed paper, which isn't used. And with the email address you gain, you can communicate with your shareholders digitally and a little bit more efficient regarding sustainability. What are the rights and duties granted to ARUC or SRD II? It can involve the shareholders in your business policy processes, and it's basically the requirement for this is the positive knowledge and identity of your shareholders and their concernments. I'm always pushing the wrong button. So we have Rainer Hecker here. Is he already in? Oh, there he is. Okay, so Rainer Hecker, the stage is yours. Very glad to have you here. You are a cooperation partner from day one of SRD II, so we are very, very glad. And Rainer Hecker will give you like his thoughts and shares his point of view on SRD II. And Mr. Hecker, the stage is yours.
Yeah, great. Dzień dobry, and good afternoon to Warsaw. I would like to be in Warsaw in person, but due to timing restrictions, constraints on my side, it's not possible today. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Tobias. And first of all, I would like to thank, of course, Bundesanzeiger and Warsaw Stock Exchange to have me here at this event. Yeah, that's exactly the chart. And I will talk about SRD II, shareholder identification. And as Tobias mentioned, I'm manager investor relations at ThyssenKrupp. I spent, well, actually my whole work life in finance. So I started in corporate finance, dealt with stock exchanges at that time in London, in Paris, and Zurich, and of course also in Germany. And I do the investor relations job since 1999. And SRD II is a topic which I came across very early, and also thanks to Bundesanzeiger was, let's say, on top of the development. And why came I in contact with SRD II? That's first of all, in general, the job. And specifically, I did all the shareholder IDs at ThyssenKrupp, and so since 1999. And I'm also since end of 2015 responsible for the annual general meeting, and that's the name of the game. It has to do with shareholders, and one gets to know a lot of shareholders over time. And when we look at the next chart, I can give you also some information and to put in contact with ThyssenKrupp shares and with a long history of the company. And Tobias mentioned it's steel, but it's in fact more than steel. It's material distribution, it's submarines, it's automotive supply, and it's hydrogen business. So a quite wide variety of activities which are in the company. And as I mentioned, a long history. Krupp, one part of the company was founded back more than 200 years, Thyssen in 1891. And one of the predecessor companies, so ThyssenKrupp is, well, the product of mergers of several companies. August Thyssenhütte, so the first stock-listed company, was already listed in 1953, very early. One of the first ones after World War II in Germany. And typically in Germany, at that time, you needed 5 shareholders at the beginning. And already 1 year later, the company had 32,000 shareholders. So to get to know 5 shareholders is easy, but it's much more complicated to find out who are the 32,000 shareholders. That's one difficulty in there. And the development went further. So in the 90s, there were already 240,000 shareholders. 40,000 out of that were employees. And in 1999, the two companies merged. And first Thyssen and later ThyssenKrupp was part of the German blue chip index DAX. And since 2019, ThyssenKrupp is in the MDAX, which is also fine, and gives us also support for our work, because the target is, of course, to come back to DAX, which is not easy, but achievable. So that's what we work on. And today, well, to give you some fun facts, sales is 34 billion euro, more than 100,000 employees, locations in 56 countries, 134 nationalities work for ThyssenKrupp, more than double than the countries we are present. And just as we talk here in Warsaw, 1,500 employees out of that work in Poland for ThyssenKrupp, mainly in the distribution of materials. And of course, if I were present now, I would ask who is a shareholder of ThyssenKrupp, and maybe I would see a number of hands raised, fingers lift, me. But that's, of course, not a shareholder ID. That's part of it. That's anyway interesting, but that's not a full shareholder ID. And you know what I mean when you look at the numbers. So the capital stock is 1.6 roughly billion euros, and shares are 622 million. Means it could be 622 million shareholders if everybody has only one. It's less, but it's not an easy job to identify these all. And important to understand also why it's maybe for a company as ThyssenKrupp is a bit more difficult to find out who are the shareholders. You know, there are bearer shares in the market. So shareholders by definition are anonymous. And then you've got registered shares. And also in this case, shareholders have the option and possibility to hide, and you don't know them exactly. So we, as ThyssenKrupp, have bearer shares out there. So therefore, SRD II and the shareholder identification is even more interesting to us. And as a bearer share company, to give you a feeling how complicated it is to get information, we can look at the next page, and you will see what I mean. What is the available information on the shareholder base when you only look at the current regulation? And you know, it's thresholds from where investors have to announce there are shareholders in that amount. Means more than 3%, more than 5%, 10%, and so on. And considering only these thresholds, we got information from only 4 shareholders. Means, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have around 200,000 shareholders now. 4 out of 200,000 shareholders is not very much, right? And they make up for some 35%. And then, of course, as an IR, you have to make up your mind, and especially before SRD II came into place. And what you see below is kind of the jigsaw we put together, so parts and pieces. So we know the foundation, we know a shareholder like Sivian, and then we do a classical shareholder ID, and you find out 300, 400 shareholders around the globe. And then you make an educated guess on private investors, because that is nothing you will find out with a shareholder ID. And so there's a lot of guessing in that process. It's, by the way, also a lengthy process. So doing a shareholder ID means you ask for information, you take a provider, they go to work, and after 6 to 8 weeks, they come back. And then there's still a lot of guessing. So for the IR work, you get some valuable information, but it's still a lot of guessing. And when we look at the next page, you see what I mean with white spots. And in this case, these white spots are gray. So what do I get? I get information on active investors. That's the upper part of the chart. This is mutual funds. Then we come back. We heard in the presentation beforehand about ESG. What becomes more important, and more investors look at sustainability, look at ethical investments, environment. This is also something you can find out with a shareholder ID in a classical way. Typically pension funds, index funds, so the lower part of the chart, passive investments you find out. But the gray boxes you will not find out. So typically a hedge fund didn't inform any provider about the holdings. Activists, shareholders by nature don't do. And sovereign wealth funds, private shareholders, as I mentioned, difficult to get the information. So the universe and ways to get to the information about the shareholder base in the past was quite limited, and it was quite difficult to get any picture. And once you have it, it was outdated because it's a quite lengthy process. So when we look at the next page, I would like to give you also a bit of a feeling why you need this information. And first thing is, of course, some basic considerations. So you might argue, well, I don't found stock corporation every day, so company is up and running, so I'm not in need of that. But of course, you come maybe to a point also as a company like ThyssenKrupp. We had strategies in the past and strategy realignments and said, well, we will change the portfolio of the company. And in 1999, we planned an IPO for steel. In 2019, we planned an IPO for elevator. And doing that, you make up your mind about marketing. Whom do I address, and how will I do such a transaction? Will I give shares of the company to the existing shareholders? All these kind of things. And how do I do the marketing? How do I approach the shareholder? And how can I get them so that they follow my plans? And in steel, we did market research, and classical market research you do also for consumer products. So we sent out teams into the street and asked people whether they are shareholders, and then we did questionnaires, what would be interesting for them. Elevator, for instance, in 2019, we made up also our minds, because there's also, or has been, a B2C business in there with stair lifts, and one could also address private shareholders, but data on that was not available. So it was quite difficult at the end, and those plans didn't fulfill, and we didn't IPO the business. But we dealt, of course, with all these questions. And also related to that, then you come to the point and ask yourself, what kind of share would I like to have? Do I have a B2B business? It's not that necessary to talk to shareholders. Maybe bearer shares are fine. But at any point you come to the answer that most of your shareholders might be also your customers in telecoms or in automotive, or depends which business you run, or in elevator. It could be interesting to have registered shares to get in dialogue with your shareholders. So in advance of SRD II. So, and what are the key questions behind? How do I get in contact with my investors? Means typically the use case for IR is planning roadshows, planning conferences, and then of course you have to know where to go. So, and in some respects, also a shareholder ID can be misleading. So there can be highlights to go to this country, and then you notice, oh, it's only passive investors, and they don't need IR. And then, of course, that's another related question: where are shareholders based? So, do I have to go to Asia? Do I have to go to the Americas? That's decisive questions you can do with a shareholder ID. And what is also the purpose of the investment? What kind of shareholders I have to deal with? I mentioned already activists, and I mentioned already ethical investors and an ESG focus. And that's something one has at least to be prepared with. And also with regard to the AGM, we come later on to that again. But that's decisive. How many shareholders in my shareholder base are with that focus? What do I have to expect at the AGM? What kind of questions will they ask? Do they have any concern with regard to the portfolio? So in our case, for instance, we are in military vessels. So the submarines we produce are not yellow, so they are gray. And some investors have concerns. That's fair. But that's also something we address transparently in our IR work. But you have to know who's your shareholder, who is conscious about that, so that you can address these topics in the right way. And so, therefore, to answer all these questions, I think SRD II, shareholder identification, provides a very solid basis for these kind of decisions. And maybe when we look at the next page, exactly, what's the advantage? And I described a lot from the past and what was not available. So with SRD II and the shareholder identification, it's really for the first time that you can go into the market and ask your shareholders, please tell me, are you a shareholder, and to which amount? What are your holdings? And as Tobias described earlier, you get name, tell me your name, tell me your address. So as many details as possible, and ideally also the email address. And then a service provider as dpaii is decisive in that respect, because what corporates get is a claim to identify shareholders on request, and this request is placed with the intermediates in Europe. So, as I mentioned, I worked in finance, and I would have claimed I know a lot of banks. But when you do for the first time the process, you will see there are a lot more banks outside. And to be honest, at the time when I worked in finance, the EU was much more smaller. And now it's 27 countries, and there are a lot of banks outside. And I bet nobody knows all of them, but dpaii knows now. And well, that's the basis. And what's important is, and what is also, and I take this now, I mention in Europe, but this works not only in Europe, because when you've got a regulation, as we now have in Europe, also the other areas like Asia and US look at that. And that's a very interesting point. And a very, in my view, very strong advantage of the shareholder identification under the new directive is also you have a clear record date. So in the past, providers go and get and collect the information, and part of the information is on that day, part of the information on maybe another day. You never know. And so now you have a uniform record date, and the process is really quite speedy because it's in the directive defined how fast intermediates have to react. And you are also, as a corporate, able to say, well, I would like to have it that day, and in defining the days of starting the process and delivering, it's very much that you are free, and it's really easy to do this. So we as ThyssenKrupp did it as I think the very first one in Europe in September 20. So at the first day, I think it was 10 o'clock at that day, we were the first ones to push the button and say we would like to know our shareholders. And on the next page, I can give you a view on how easy to achieve this is. And my example is, of course, dpaii. And when you, maybe you know that platform already, when you would like to place a new order, one has to admit, first you have to create an account. You get help on that, but that's also not a rocket science. But when you've got your account, it's exactly the three circles, the three yellow circles. I hope you see this. I made there, and I put in the date of today. That's a record date, and that's a date where I would like to place, as an example, my order, and then give the intermediates 10 days time. And on 2nd of May, you get the responses, and you can be sure that you get responses. And then, of course, a third item you have to choose is whether you would like to have a hurdle rate, whether you would like to have all shareholders identified. So as I did now, I said the hurdle rate is 1. So from the first share onwards, I would like to know who are the shareholders. And then a new item, I understand, is a type of order. So whether you go for all intermediates or a choice. I will not touch that much on this because first it's new. We as a company didn't use it, so I leave it to Bundesanzeiger to explain that. So what we did is full shareholder IDs, and looking at these three items I have to enter, and I would say it takes 2.5 minutes to do that. Comparing with a normal shareholder ID, everybody who has done this knows you have to discuss some things with your provider to get what you want. Here it's these three items, and then you get the results. And the results are, I called it more colorful, because what we see on the next page is the picture you might remember I showed at the beginning, and you saw a number of white spots, or what I said, gray spots, and now it's much more colorful, because that's what you get. So I'm not saying that you get the full picture, but you get far more than with the, let's say, common process. And I think not staying too much on this chart, only saying you will get much more. I think we can move to the last chart in that on that topic, and what is the experience so far. And I can say in a nutshell, to make it short, what you get from shareholder identification with SRD II. It's faster, it's better, and it's more. And all in all, it's quite new. And I will not, I will admit, it's working. Currently, it's working, I would say, well, and much better than the first one we did. So the first one we did, 3rd of September 2020, it was a bit a bumpy road, but now I would say it's a smooth highway. And what works is, let's say, the platforms and that's dpaii, and there are also others outside. And so the technical environment is there, and we have the cooperation of the intermediates. That's decisive. And that was a concern of the parties involved at the beginning. Will the intermediates deliver all the data? Because data protection is a topic. It's the customers of the banks, and this is typically sensitive. And there are good reasons for people to hide, and we see this currently. But there is no reason why shouldn't a company not have the right to ask who are my shareholders. We simply have to know. And then, of course, it's very cost effective. So the experience we made. And there was also a concern who will bill any service. It's still an ongoing discussion, I have to admit, but so far on our end, we didn't experience any surprises. So, and therefore it's a very cost-efficient way to identify shareholders. And when I mentioned faster, I can give you a proof point on that. I mentioned 6 to 8 weeks for a normal shareholder ID, and with an SRD II shareholder ID, you get the first results after, I think last time it was 6 days. And after 6 days, we stood at 80%, and we ended up at more than 90%. I think it was 94, 95%. So it means at the same time, we are at the second point, we are at the better. So you get better information, more quality information. And other than at the beginning, the data are already consolidated, and there's no double counting anymore in there. So the tools are in place to eliminate that. And then when we talk about more, our experience was simply looking at the countries identified. So we thought ThyssenKrupp shares are maybe in Europe and some other countries, so the North America, maybe some others. And there was a bit of a surprise that we identified shareholders in more than 90 countries. That was above our expectations. And we were also curious about how many shareholders we would identify, in fact, at the end. And that was also a bit of a surprise. So we had our guess, and it were 180,000 shareholders in the first go. And this was, as one has also to admit, 180,000 shareholders means 180,000 Excel lines. So this takes you a bit of a time to read through these lines and to digest the data and to analyze this data. So it means it's you can take also an analysis on there. I understand this is also a service, but you have to deal with a huge amount of data. But it's at the end a very transparent picture we get. And when I asked at the beginning who's our shareholder, and maybe in the room or online, from the ID, we got in the first go the information that we have 23 shareholders in Poland, and in the last ID it were even more than 80 shareholders in Poland. So thanks to our story, and we are happy to have all these shareholders. And you see, it's also worth to have a second look and to see how, as an IR, work develops. So we do roadshows in Poland for years. Sometimes it takes some time, but well, the outcome is for us also supportive, and we are happy to have shareholders in all the countries I mentioned. And I think with SRD II, I think that it's a strong regulation, which is very positive for companies to get information, to get transparency, but it's also advantageous for shareholders to execute their rights when it comes to AGM. And we will touch on this, I understand, a little bit later. And but that is what I wanted to present you on shareholder identification today. So I would like to end up here, and thank you very much for your interest and your attention today. And then I think, Tobias, you will take over again. Thank you very much.
Yes, right. Thank you, Mr. Hecker, as well. Yeah, we're going to move on to the next slide. Please, Mr. Hecker, stay online, because we're going to come back to you later, to your last slide. So, Tobias, it's now your turn again. Please continue with the presentation. We're coming to the next agenda point.
So, before I get into the third agenda point, Rainer, actually, you were the first person worldwide to ever use an SRD II and making a share ID. So actually, yeah, you were the first person. And we will see the status quo of share IDs after with SRD II. So jump ahead. So what we provide as a platform is that we identify over 90% of your shareholders, and we guarantee it. So if you don't receive more than 90% of your shareholders, either it be in persons, private persons with a quantity of 1, or big investment companies with a quantity of X, we identify 90%, and if not, it doesn't cost anything. So we want to give this guarantee because we want to push the market. We want to push intermediaries, we want to push ourselves, we want to push our department, our dpaii department, to be better, to make SRD II something, because we talked about ESEF, we talked about ESG, and this is something where something is taken from the company. Like, you have to do something, you are obliged, and disregarding ESG and the philosophy behind it, you don't get anything back. With SRD II, actually, issuers across Europe get something back. They are also obliged to communicate in regards of general meetings or something. We will get into that topic in a couple of seconds, but you also have the possibility, you gain something. You can identify all your shareholders, and there are different variations on why, different purposes. We had the topic of purpose today. So there are different purposes, but first of all, it's the possibility to have it plain and simple. And as Rainer just told us, it's quick, it's easy, and you don't have to do anything. You don't have to communicate with us more than, okay, I want to use this one, and then you can go off. Like, it's done in a couple of minutes, as you said, Rainer. And yeah, we have more than 80% after 7 days. Actually, we are quicker today. So we get our first feedback from Clearstream. If you are a German issuer, if you, for example, are from France or the Benelux, you have Euroclear as the single entity. We contact first via SWIFT if you start a share ID. We get the response from the central provider in like 20 minutes to 25 minutes. These current days, and it gets quicker and quicker and quicker. Every share ID we do, everything is better. The SWIFT network works better. Our intelligence, we gain intelligence and we get better. And at the end, it's more transparency and facilitated shareholder participation. Yeah, and it's possible for all regulated issuers across Europe, so all 5,000 to 6,000. If you are undecided, if you are able to do a share ID, ask yourself if you are obliged with ESEF. If you are obliged with ESEF, if you have to fulfill ESEF requirements, you are obliged, or you have the possibility to use SRD II to identify your shareholders. And yeah, as I said before, I was going up front, after a one-time onboarding process, which you can do via me or via Fabian or via our colleagues at the Bundesanzeiger Verlag, which takes you a couple of minutes, you then are able to do it whenever you need it. And I will give you some insights on what Fabian researched with our customers on the next page. But first of all, a small overview on how was SRD II used. You see January, like we have 2021 in green, in lime green, and we have this current year run in red. And you see it started in January, February, and March last year. It started very, very slow. Then we dipped. April is in Germany, first of all, it's ESEF. ESEF is the main point, the main focus point, and also the general meetings. So that's why we dipped in April last year. But then you see a steady development, a positive development. And as you see right now in like January, February, March, we are already, like we breaking through barriers every day, every month. It's used more and more and more. And that means also that it gets better, better and better, which I think is very, very important to understand. So if you use it, you help yourself at the end of the day. So jump to the next slide. Because Fabian did a lot of research. So if you are in a cooperation with me or with us regarding ESEF or possibly in the future ESG or SRD II, you probably received an email from Fabian because he's always keen to ask you what can we do better. It's his main part of his job. Is always he is asking me like, who can I ask Toby? Who can I ask for improvement? Who can I ask for a specific workshop? Who is a customer you think is knowledgeable? And as we have Rainer today here, Rainer is one of our main knowledge points. We gained a lot of knowledge through ThyssenKrupp. And Fabian researched with our issuers, with our customers, like how can we prepare the annual meeting with SRD II? Because the reality is a lot of issuers across Europe use the traditional 6 to 8 weeks way. And I will always refer to NASDAQ because this is the biggest shareholder and analyst worldwide, or it has been. We wanted to provide like an idea of how you can use SRD II in terms of preparing your annual general meeting. And Fabian did a lot of, as I said, a lot of research, and he asked, like, I don't know, if it's 80, 85 issuers, gave us feedback on what can they do. And what we offer is you can either use just a simple share ID for 1,500 euros, like, think again, how much money did you pay for NASDAQ share IDs? How long took it? How much work was it? And then, cost effectiveness was mentioned by Rainer. You can either use it with subscription or without subscription. A subscription with us is always 12 months. It's always 3 months to deadline subscription. But what we created was the HV Plus package. HV Plus, in Germany, the general meeting is Hauptversammlung, so H and V are the keys here, the keywords, like call it GM Plus package in English if you want to. And what you gain is, and Rainer said that you have the possibility to use a full ID, but also there's a possibility to have an individual request. And in this HV Plus package, we put in 2 full IDs. So figure yourself, you have your general meeting upcoming, it's 2 months to go, and like most of our issuers said, okay, we will do a share ID 6 to 8 weeks before our general meeting to get a clearer view about our shareholders. Then you have the possibility with the 2 individual IDs to have a smaller look. So in an individual ID, we don't ask Clearstream as the first entity. We directly go to a bank. So if you want to know, for example, how many shareholders are at the entity of, for example, Deutsche Bank, we can just shoot a laser, not to Clearstream, but to the Deutsche Bank directly, and they will disclose everything that's below their own chain of intermediaries. So they're investors that are like at the Deutsche Bank, so invested at the Deutsche Bank. And you can use this twice to monitor and screen your shareholders if you like expecting something, changes of shares, of investments. And then most of the issuers use a share ID again, so 6 to 8 weeks. Then you have 2 of these specific individual IDs. And then to the date of the general meeting, you can use another share ID. You have your current information, your current shareholder information, and you can like be most prepared and best prepared for your general meeting, in my thoughts, than ever. And yeah, you see it on the right. You can identify in advance, and obviously you get the mail addresses. You also get the private addresses of institutional and natural investors. And if you're clever, you can use it in marketing and advertising purposes. Obviously, your legal department has to have a clear view on what are you doing with the email addresses, but you can use them. These are yours. And yeah, the most important thing, in my point of view, is monitoring the shareholders, which is also possible very, very closely. And yeah, feel free to find out. We will jump back to Rainer, because SRD II is much more than shareholder identification. And Rainer?
Yeah, I take over again. Thank you very much. As you mentioned, much more than shareholder identification. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I'm also responsible in ThyssenKrupp for the annual general meeting. And in fact, when the legislation and SRD II came into fact, we made up our minds. What does this mean? And we were in the mode to prepare an annual general meeting in 2020 with shareholders being 21 first, with shareholders being present, and due to Corona, the outcome was different. But of course, not knowing at that time exactly, we made up our minds, what does this mean when we now invite shareholders to our AGM across Europe who will come. And therefore, it was very helpful to see via shareholder identification and to get a clearer picture who are the shareholders, and to see will someone from the Netherlands, which is not far away from our normal AGM location, will come to our shareholder meeting. All these kind of questions, and related to that, of course, when one makes up his mind, the outcome can be different, of course, from company to company, depending on where you are located, or from your business. Might be that you have shareholders who have a different language than the one in the home country. You make up your mind whether you have also the signs and all the guidelines for the AGM also in English. So typically we do our AGM in Bochum, in Germany, in the western part of Germany, and traditionally all is labeled in German. But then we thought, is it wise to do it also in English when we have a more international audience? Well, Corona made us shift to a virtual AGM. We did not have this problem because it is German, English anyway. But this is a question one can deal with. And so what we see as an outcome of SRD II, and what is positive for shareholders, the invitation process is much faster. So the shareholders become the invitation to the shareholder meeting earlier than in the past. So in our case, it's around 2 to 3 weeks earlier, and shareholders have time to register and make up their minds. And this is something which is positive. And what's also positive is that shareholders at the same time will not receive, as Tobias mentioned, any paperwork anymore. So this year we would have had an invitation to the AGM with, I think, 75, 78 pages with a remuneration system inside and remuneration report. And so this would mean that we have to send a booklet to shareholders. So this is gone with SRD II because everybody gets his invitation electronically, and also in practice, the ones who have not an electronic deposit with their bank, they get a letter with only one page with a link inside, and that is also under an ESG headline, an aspect of sustainability to avoid having so much resources used for an AGM. And as Tobias mentioned, only a small part of the shareholder base reads through all the information materials. And then, of course, executing also on the shareholder rights, having online tools to vote is something which is a positive one, which comes out of SRD II. You can get a receipt and a consideration of the votes. You know exactly how your votes were processed. And then, of course, you have the wide field of corporate actions. And like Tobias mentioned, dividend payout, capital increases. So this is all something investors not necessarily became all from their banks. And coming back to the AGM, also the invitation to an annual general meeting was not processed abroad. So our shareholders in Germany got typically all the invitation to our AGM, but for instance, shareholders in Austria didn't get it, in Switzerland didn't get it, and in all the other countries as well. And this is indeed a positive outcome. And we saw this in 2021 when the invitation was processed under, this directive. We got from Austria shareholders who registered, Switzerland, Netherlands, all around Germany, but also, and that's what I mentioned, also beyond Europe, from the US, from Dubai, Hungary, Turkey, you name it. A lot of countries we actually did not expect out of the 90, not from every country, but there was quite a good interest, and people followed our company, followed the AGM, and in 2021, due to Corona, it was even a bit more easier for them because they could follow on their screens. We did this already in the past. We did this not only due to Corona, but now people became more aware about online AGMs. And so I think for a shareholder currently under this directive, there is more in for him or her when they own shares in the company, because they can use their rights easier, they get the information, at all, and get the information faster. So a lot of positives for the shareholder, and that's my perspective. For corporates, it's easier and more cost effective, because as soon as shareholders get the invitation by mail, don't get printed copies, that's cost we can save. And it's not only for the purpose of saving money. As I mentioned, there's not a real value behind it, because it's online anyway, and people tend to use it online. So that was also one thing we were concerned when we, for the first time, did this, because we were concerned that people get angry that they don't get their printed copies. But there was also a surprise. People were used to having PDFs and going online and get the information. It was only a few people who complained and were not used to that, but that all of that was manageable. So and that's why I mentioned SRD II is much more than shareholder identification. Also, the processes around the AGM make things easier, both for shareholders but also for corporates. And I think that's what I also wanted to bring across from a practical side, from a corporate view.
Yeah.
So also here, thank you for your attention.
Yeah, you did, Rainer, you did actually bring it across very well. You are a cooperation partner since day one, and we are very, very glad to have you because you brought a lot of knowledge, and I hope and I think, I'm pretty sure you got that knowledge or provided knowledge for all our attendants today. So, it's been a long day. A lot of regulatory stuff, a lot of directives, a lot of obligements, some requirements. Yeah, show our contact again, yeah. So there's one thing left. It's to say thank you to all the people that's having the technique running, the cameras, the microphones, the online streaming. Great. Many thanks to Stock Exchange Warsaw for invitation, for planning with Fabian, for like doing everything, the food, everything is perfect, set up perfect. Like a big thanks to you guys. Thanks to all our guests, our external guests. We started with Sabrina Over, which is also a colleague of ours, but she's an external guest in cases of what we do. And thanks to you, Sabrina, it was very glad. It was very cool that you helped us out in the federal side of ESEF. Then we had Marko Stefancic from Ericsson Nikola Tesla joined us digitally from Zagreb. He brought a great perspective on his point of view on ESEF. Our second topic was ESG. Mr. Christoph Kocher, if you want to please come again. Yeah, come. We want to say thank you. So thanks a lot to your presentation. It was very insightful. There was very much to carry on, to work with in the future days, for me as well, but I'm pretty sure for all the attendants as well. And last but not least, we had SRD II and Rainer Hecker from ThyssenKrupp. We are very glad for the cooperation, for the help we get, because I said it a couple of times today, we don't gain knowledge just by ourselves. We need cooperation partners. We need guys like you, guys like Rainer, guys like Marco, to help us, to show us their point of view so we can get better, so Fabian can get better and make the products as well as possible. Yeah, last but not least, the man who did everything today, who managed everything, who planned everything. Fabian, big thanks to you. Everything was prepared perfectly. Every slide was on point. The technique was on point. You did everything really great. I know it's been a lot of work. I know that. I saw you. I saw how stressed you were the last days. Thanks a lot to you. Without you, this wouldn't be possible.
Thank you, Tobias.
So the last words are for the attendance digitally on-site. Thanks a lot for attending. We will send you an email from the Stock Exchange Warsaw with the link if you want to rewatch something, with contact details from Mr. Kocher, from Mr. Hecker, from ThyssenKrupp, and from Marko Stefancic. Please feel free to contact us. It's been a long day. I'm very tired. Have a nice day. Have a nice afternoon, and stay healthy. And goodbye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.